Hello, everyone. You're listening to Psychology Outside the Box. My name is Dr. Flower. I have a PhD in psychology, so I'm not a wannabe or a knockoff. I've been teaching college and university courses for 20 years. Psychology is a vast field that connects to many things in your life. If you have a curious mind, you're definitely in the right place. So sit back and enjoy the ride. Hey, great news, everybody. I just found out that my IQ test results came back negative. I guess I've been worried all week for nothing. At least I feel better knowing that I still have my street smarts. Sesame Street smarts, that is. For those of you who like to get to the bottom line right away, here it is. Are IQ tests really smart or really stupid? They are both at the very same time, just like most people. According to the yin-yang principle, everything good in the world also has a dark side. This duality is true of many innovations that have good and bad consequences, including automobiles, the internet, and Einstein's famous E=mc² formula that led to nuclear energy, but also the development of the atomic bomb. Psychologist Abraham Maslow expressed the following idea. I suppose it is tempting, if the only tool you have is a hammer, to treat everything as if it were a nail. This statement refers to over-reliance on a familiar or favorite tool. In other words, if you have only one tool, you will try and use it to resolve every problem, even if it is not the best solution, even if sometimes it may be destructive. This warning certainly applies to IQ tests. Unfortunately, IQ test results are often misunderstood, misinterpreted, overinterpreted, and overhyped by many people. This includes psychologists, test administrators, journalists, and the general public. During the past 100 years or so, I think IQ testing has done some good things, but also a lot of harm. Your first question might well be, what exactly is intelligence? The short answer is that we are not exactly sure. See, I told you this podcast would be very informative. Intelligence, so fundamental to our lives, remains very controversial and not well understood. The main problem is that we have no foolproof and absolute measure of intelligence. Physical characteristics like height and weight can be measured directly, as can be heart rate, blood pressure, cholesterol levels, and blood sugar. But intelligence cannot be measured directly. There is no simple medical test. There is no gold standard that will give us a complete and accurate picture of intelligence. Likewise, there is no simple medical test for many other psychological conditions such as major depression, severe anxiety disorders, obsessive-compulsive disorder, bipolar disorder, personality disorders, ADHD, autism, and schizophrenia. During the 1800s, many scientists thought we could evaluate intelligence in a simple and direct way. The term craniometry, and that's spelled craniometry, refers to the measurement of skull volume and its relation to intellectual abilities. It seemed obvious that bigger skulls would contain bigger brains, and the bigger the brain, the higher the intellectual function. Since men had larger skulls, this led quickly to the conclusion that men were smarter. This opinion was widely accepted, especially by men, and was used to exclude women from voting, from education, and from most jobs. For a long time, women were considered to be intellectually inferior because of this mistake. Even the famous Charles Darwin claimed in his 1896 book, The Descent of Man, that the male reaches a higher eminence in whatever he takes up than can women, whether requiring deep thought, reason, or imagination, or merely the use of the senses and hands. If we believe that brain size by weight or volume reveals the degree of intelligence, then this quickly leads to some crazy conclusions. By extending this loopy logic, whales would be considered the most intelligent creatures on Earth because they have the largest brains by far. A human brain weighs about 3 pounds compared to the sperm whale with a 17-pound brain. No contest. Not only are whales smart, but they are gentle, curious, playful, and affectionate. Why can't our spouse or partner be more like that? Perhaps whales really should rule this planet instead of humans. There might actually be some advantages given the self-destructive tendencies of humans. We eventually abandoned the idea of using skull size as an indicator of intelligence. In fact, it was Alice Lee, one of the first women to attend London University, who convinced male scientists of their mistake. But not before she was fiercely attacked by many prominent men, including Francis Galton. Her study and report was published in 1900. Sadly, there is still some controversy and confusion about brain volume and its relation to intelligence. Although there is definitely some correlation between brain volume and IQ, most scientists now understand that correlation does not prove causation. But sometimes we seem determined to repeat our mistakes over and over again instead of learning from them. For example, there is evidence today that brain volume shrinks as a normal part of aging. Some people have jumped on this as proof that intelligence also must decline as we get older. If less brain volume in women does not reduce intelligence, it is foolish to assume that it does so in older people. It's a triumph of stereotypes about aging over science. The frontal lobes are important to intelligence according to almost every imaging study, but so are other areas including the temporal and parietal lobes. We now believe that a complex network across several different brain regions is responsible for intelligence. Lots of research has shown that intelligence is one of the most heritable characteristics. Heritable means that it is passed down to us by our parents through the genes we receive at conception. Studies of identical twins have found that the heritability of IQ is between 60% and 80%. IQ goes from being weakly correlated with genetics for children to being strongly correlated with genetics for adults. It appears that we inherit most of our intelligence from our parents. So feel free to blame your parents for any academic failures or lack of success in your life. If only they had given you better genes, things could have been different. You could have been so much stronger, faster, smarter, and better looking. Maybe even quote the classic lines spoken by Marlon Brando in the 1954 movie On the Waterfront. I could have had class. I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody instead of a bum, which is what I am. Brando won the Best Actor Academy Award for his role in this movie. Though it is highly genetic, there is no single gene that is responsible for intelligence. Evidence indicates that hundreds of different genes are likely involved, with each specific gene making a small contribution to overall intelligence. So yes, the concept of intelligence is really, really complicated. The most famous early example in IQ test history was created by STANFORD-BINET in 1904. Binet and his colleague Theodore Simon developed IQ levels and tests for the French government to identify learning disabilities and other academic weaknesses in grade school students. This became known as the Binet-Simon scale and was the first recognized IQ test. The level of a person's intelligence is often referred to as their IQ. This stands for intelligence quotient. In the modern era, the two most respected and widely used IQ tests for adults are the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale and the STANFORD-BINET. You will not find copies of these real IQ tests on the internet. Only unworthy IQ test wannabes. There are countless free IQ tests online. Take them for fun, but don't take them too seriously. Scammers use free tests to promote further paid-for examinations or ask for money to give you a more detailed analysis of your results. The most important question related to all online IQ tests is this: are we foolish enough to take them and then believe the results? Paying the internet $20 to take a 10-minute IQ test is you failing the test. The current version of the Wechsler test covers a wide range of mental abilities. It surpassed the STANFORD-BINET in popularity during the 1960s. Today, the Wechsler remains the most frequently used intelligence test in the world for both adolescents and adults. IQ tests combine several separate subscores to produce a full-scale IQ, which represents overall intellectual functioning. An average score is set at 100. The majority of the population, about 68%, will have scores between 85 and 115. That's 115. It is important to know that both the Wechsler scale and the STANFORD-BINET IQ test have a maximum adult score of 160. IQ tests are simply not designed to go beyond this number. There is no existing test that can provide a level of precision above 160. I am so very tired of seeing IQ estimates on the internet of people with the highest IQs. Almost all these estimates are useless, especially when they are above 160. Anything above 160 is based on pure speculation and guesswork and does not come from credible test results. In a previous podcast, I discussed an article in Reader's Digest that claimed to identify 35 people today smarter than Einstein. You should know that as a kid, I was a big fan of superheroes such as X-Men, Spider-Man, the Incredible Hulk, and Iron Man. But my favorite hero, and I'm not kidding, was Albert Einstein. No one messes with my hero and gets away with it, not even Reader's Digest. Supposedly, many of these individuals listed in Reader's Digest have IQs between 200 and 300. So if the maximum legitimate IQ score is 160, there is definitely something weird and wacky about scores in the 200 to 300 range. The Wechsler and STANFORD-BINET do not identify who is a genius or is likely to be. An IQ score between 140 and 160 puts you in the top 2% of the population. This is obviously very good, but does not give you license to call yourself a genius. At best, you will be enrolled as a member of Mensa, but don't expect a Nobel Prize anytime soon. And there is absolutely no physical evidence of genius in the brain. An X-ray, EEG, CAT scan, or fMRI cannot identify such individuals. Biologically, the really smart brain looks very much like any other brain. Approximately 150 million people across the planet will have IQs in the top 2%. So there is no shortage of smart people. Being in the top 2% makes you unusual to some degree, but you have to share this special honor with millions of other people in North America and across the world. In fact, it would be difficult to go anywhere without bumping into these 2% individuals, although we would not be aware because they mostly look and act like everyone else. Does a very high IQ score of 160 mean that we will go on to change the world? Perhaps, but probably not. Will we become rich or famous, creating wonderful new inventions? Possibly, but probably not. The mass majority will lead quiet, ordinary, and undistinguished but happy lives. As I mentioned, you will not find copies of the Wechsler or STANFORD-BINET IQ tests on the internet. The gatekeepers of legitimate IQ tests keep them closely guarded, in darkness, inside locked chambers. It's like the elusive unicorn. We know it's out there, but it's a shy and bashful beast. You cannot see the questions beforehand because this would give some people an advantage and mess up the standardization process. If we actually get close to real IQ tests or perhaps touch them, the magic may fade or even disappear, and so they remain hidden deep in the forest, away from prying eyes. Only persons from higher dimensions, that's PhD, are allowed to touch and use the sacred scrolls, and all are sworn to secrecy. IQ tests like the Wechsler and the STANFORD-BINET are well constructed and have been refined and updated over many decades. But unlike unicorns, there's really nothing magical or mystical about IQ tests. Knowledge of facts is not the same as intelligence. You are born with intelligence in your genes and brain, but you aren't born with knowledge. Knowledge or facts are learned through education and life experience. Intelligence is the ability to apply this knowledge in ways that provide new insights and understanding. Nonetheless, traditional intelligence tests definitely measure knowledge or what a person has learned, but they also measure higher level cognitive functions and mental capacity, including comprehension, reasoning, logic, and problem solving. These two elements, knowledge and mental abilities, are so closely interlinked that separating them would be almost impossible to do. The really big question is, and always has been, can we be confident that IQ tests truly capture the essence of intelligence? Or perhaps we are missing something important. Many scientists are skeptical that a single test score can truly capture everything about a person's underlying intelligence. And for sure, there are many things that an IQ test does not measure, and many of these factors will influence your potential success. An IQ score may not measure your creativity or your curiosity. It doesn't tell your parents or teachers about your emotional readiness or social skills, such as empathy, honesty, self-confidence, working well with others, sense of humor, initiative, self-control, or coping with stress and emotions. An IQ score doesn't measure your practical intelligence or knowing how to make things work. This could include simple car repairs, everyday home repairs, parenting skills, and managing personal finances. In the past, I was dazzled, maybe even blinded by the value of intelligence, but gradually over time, I have changed my views. Nowadays, I put even more emphasis on the power of hard work, passion, motivation, and drive. Be persistent. When obstacles get in your way, power through and don't give up. I have tried to encourage this mindset in my children and also in my students. IQ tests do not measure these important attitudes and traits. So yes, indeed, there are a lot of essential attributes that IQ tests do not measure at all. And for sure, intelligence is not the only factor, or perhaps even the most important, that will influence your happiness and life success. One of the major criticisms of intelligence tests is that they do not take into account cultural differences. This means that intelligence tests are typically designed for one specific culture, and almost all of them are designed for Western cultures. So IQ tests do not deserve to be mystified or to be glorified blindly without question. It is very much a cultural preference. You see, in most non-Western countries, IQ tests are very rarely or never used. How can these countries possibly survive without IQ tests? Inconceivable. How can we possibly verify the accuracy of IQ tests? In the absence of a gold standard, one strategy is to compare two different tests, such as the Wechsler and the STANFORD-BINET. First, both tests must be administered to a large group of people. In other words, all people take both tests. Then we compare to see if they give us very similar results. This research has been done many times already. The results tell us that the correlation between the Wechsler scale and the STANFORD-BINET is approximately 0.80, which indicates a strong but far from perfect correspondence. So it appears that the two tests are giving us similar results most of the time. So if there is so much criticism and concern, why don't we just build a better IQ test? This is easier said than done. Let's say I spend 15 years developing the practically perfect IQ test. I am obsessed with this task so much that my children grow up without me and my wife eventually leaves me, although I don't notice for 5 years that she has gone. But now it's time for the unveiling ceremony where I present my masterpiece to the world. Everyone will see my genius and welcome my invention with joy. I will be hailed as a hero and maybe even have a parade. My genius will be recognized and rewarded. In 2 words, impossible. No way. No chance. Scientists are supposed to have an open mind, but even they resist change and prefer the comfort of the status quo. I try to explain that it is the practically perfect IQ test, but they will immediately want me to prove that it is better than existing measures. So how do I do that in the absence of the elusive gold standard? Ultimately, I will be forced to compare my perfect tests with those already being used. It turns out that my practically perfect IQ test must provide similar results as the Wechsler and STANFORD-BINET in order to be judged as being high quality. This is the infamous catch-22, or in other words, an impossible situation. I believe my practically perfect IQ test is better than existing measures, but I must demonstrate that it is the same to gain the confidence of mainstream scientists. So if my perfect test is not strongly correlated to the existing measures, scientists will scoff at me and assume that I am wrong. On the other hand, if my perfect IQ test is in fact highly correlated with existing measures, no one will be impressed. After all, we already have the well-established and respected Wechsler and STANFORD-BINET tests, so why do we need another similar test? It's a no-way-to-win situation for me. Check and mate. Game over. I lose. Wechsler and STANFORD-BINET are still the undefeated champions of the world. Well, maybe not the world, but at least North America. IQ tests do not have mystical powers, but neither is IQ just a reflection of test-taking ability. IQ is still the best measure of intelligence that we have, but it doesn't encompass all aspects of your intelligence. My conclusion these days is that while the IQ test certainly has a less than pretty history of abuse and misuse, the test can sometimes, when administered correctly and properly interpreted, be useful. Likewise, a hammer can be very useful, but if I take the hammer to repeatedly bash someone over the head, the hammer becomes a source of evil. Like a hammer, IQ tests are not inherently good or bad. This depends completely on how carefully they are used. To show another limitation of IQ tests, I will refer to my own personal history. I was born in a galaxy far, far away. I wish, but actually it was southern Italy in a very poor area of the country. There was no electricity or indoor plumbing, no automobile or grocery stores, and no money. There were schools, but nothing nearby, and we had no buses or cars or transportation. Our family moved to North America when I was 5 years old, with a little help from friends and relatives. I adjusted quickly and easily to this new environment. I excelled in school and eventually completed my PhD. I had 4 brothers and sisters who were much older when we arrived from Italy. The adjustment process was far more difficult for them, and so they did not complete high school or college. They have often called me the smart one in the family because I am more highly educated. But I am smart enough to know that is simply not true. I am not really any more intelligent. I still needed my older brother to help me fix the toilet. So it is correct that I would score much higher on standard IQ tests. I have lots of general and academic knowledge that they don't have. Is that because I'm more intelligent? Of course not. It is because I had opportunities to complete an extensive education, whereas they did not. My mother and father were illiterate. Does that mean they were stupid and lacked intelligence? Of course not. As I mentioned earlier, 60 to 80% of our intelligence is inherited from our parents. Whatever intelligence I may have, I received from them through their genes and DNA. Illiteracy does not mean lack of intelligence, but lack of opportunity. Like my brothers and sisters, my parents had no way to obtain a high-quality education, even though they opened the door for me. But if they had the same chance that I received, they too would have succeeded, just as I did. And for sure, my parents were not alone. There are hundreds of millions of other people across our planet who will never receive the opportunity to reach their full potential. This is a real tragedy. Most of you will recognize the name Albert Einstein, considered to be one of the most brilliant minds in history. Einstein was a well-educated man who attended some of the best European schools and eventually was granted a PhD in physics. This did not make him a genius, but prepared him to make his remarkable contributions to science. Even today, there are isolated tribes in South America and other parts of the world, such as Tanzania and Sentinel Island. They have had virtually no contact with the outside world. What would have happened if Einstein had been born into one of these isolated tribes? There would have been no education, no PhD, no Nobel Prize, no fame, and no scientific discoveries. He would have led a simple, quiet, but obscure life, far from the modern world of science. The potential for genius would be there in his brain, like a powerful coiled spring compressed and waiting to be released, but he would never be able to reach his potential without proper education, resources, support, and experience. The same thing is true about other members of my own family and millions of other individuals across the world. There are so many brilliant young minds that are prisoners of poverty, pain, starvation, war, and disease, almost endless talent and human potential, wasted and lost forever. Trapped in a life of misery, they may never escape without our help, and by helping them, we will be helping ourselves. Although it is widely used, IQ is not a pure or perfect measure of intelligence. IQ tests are not useless, but they are limited. The main problem is that IQ is widely misunderstood. It is important to remember that IQ test scores measure opportunities, life experiences, education, and supports that we have had throughout our lives. Intelligence needs to be nourished, just as flowers need sunshine, water, and food to bloom and blossom. So are IQ tests really smart or really stupid? They are both at the very same time, just like most people. Well, all good things must come to an end, including this podcast. But in the words of the Terminator, I'll be back. And I hope you will too. Okay, folks, it's all over for today. We're finished. We reached the end. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. I will miss you so very much.